Apple's spectacular failure to replace Qualcomm. Now, this is not your and my headline.
Exactly.
This is the Wall Street Journal's headline. And Apple and Tim Cook must have been absolutely, what would I say, pleased, excited, staggering happiness after it saw this title. Now,
how funny is this, though? This is written by Aaron Tilley, and we saw Aaron the week before. So he's literally like conjuring this, and we're talking to him, and he's not giving up. He didn't bring this up to his credit, but good job, Aaron.
Yeah. So, and this was a piece that, a few weeks ago, Pat, the announcement that Qualcomm got the big contract from Apple came out. And this kind of happened in a really busy week. This was the ARM week. This was Apple's new launch week. So it kind of got a little bit muted in the middle of that. But this was a multi-billion-dollar deal for Qualcomm. It gave some additional legs. Qualcomm had been trying to convince the investor class that losing Apple was going to be something it was prepared to do. And it was, but how much better for Qualcomm if it can keep providing to Apple for another 2 to 3 years. It's 3 years in the contract. And, in your and my opinion, when they first came out with this news at the end of their long settlement after Apple tried to sue Qualcomm into selling itself to Broadcom, that's not exactly how it happened. But, if you piece it all together, they were trying to weaken Qualcomm substantially and then basically potentially maybe see it sold to a company they had a better relationship with. Again, speculation. I'm putting that out there. Lawyers, I'm just saying. But long and short was you and I both said, Pat, it ain't happening. They're not going to get this done. Apple bought, what was it, Infineon?
Intel.
Well, Intel bought Infineon business, which was the business at Intel that was supposed to be able to build the 5G modem. That was the split in Apple's last 4G phones. They were able to buy that in split. But throughout that entire time, the Qualcomm part always outperformed the Intel part. And as that transition to 5G got closer, Intel's group could not make it. So Intel ended up having to shed that business on a fire sale to Apple with the hope that Apple could bring these resources in and ultimately figure out how to build this 5G RF system that is proven to be nearly impossible. Now, this article, Pat, basically exposed, and it was reshared all over the internet, that effectively it's been a quote unquote spectacular failure. And this goes back to 2018 was when this really started. So we're not talking 5 years. And the idea is Apple believed it could make more money if it could build its own chip like it's done in so many other parts as it's tried to vertically integrate. This is the Tim Cook special. And basically what's ended up happening is with a few parts from namely Qualcomm and Broadcom, it's either been determined they can't do it more efficiently or they can't do it at all. And so in this case, this is we can't do it at all. They were trying, Pat, right up to the deadline of last year. This phone was supposed to be the first one that had this new Apple part. And not only they couldn't make it small enough and they couldn't make it perform. So these things were overheating. They were too large. They were non-performant. And effectively, Apple had to go crawling back to Qualcomm, begging for its part, which was super interesting, Pat, because this had to be an absolute nightmare for Qualcomm or an absolute nightmare for Apple. Pat, are we the pilot or the passenger? What's going on here? And in the end, now what's happening is Apple's got chips that are probably 3 to maybe even 5 years behind when it comes to an RF modem system. And we're looking at 2026 or later before Apple's going to be able to make its own part. Having said that, Pat, I will say, while I was 100.1% sure that they were going to have to come back for this round, I do feel the next round, I will be surprised if they have to come back again. This is my early prediction, but over the next 3 years, I'll be surprised if they aren't able to make this happen.
So I know we're coming on time, but I am going to get my fill here.
Yeah, I've got them. I'm not rushing. Go.
I told you so. Not you, Daniel, but everybody out there. In 2019, I said this is going to be a stretch. Intel was 18 to 24 months behind when they bought this. And my statement was, how much money and how long to catch up? It took Samsung and Huawei 8 years to field a competitive modem, and they own the network. Okay? They've got the network.
Never was that competitive.
Right. And the game changed, right? It's not just a modem game. It's a 5G modem plus RF game. That's what I said, July 25th, 2019. Now, I never said they couldn't do that. I said it was going to be very, very painful to get there. And let me just take a quote from this article. The engineering teams working on Apple modem chip have been slowed by technical challenges, poor communications, and managers split over the wisdom of trying to design the chips rather than to buy them. So they don't even have internal alignment on the strategy, Daniel. Now, that could be between the semiconductor folks and the iPhone folks, okay? Because the iPhone folks, they want a competitive modem, right? And they want to maybe save a little money. But Apple is notorious, and yes, I've been recruited by Apple before. I didn't take the job, by the way. I never said that publicly, but there we go. And they operate in hives, and these hives don't talk to each other. They're not allowed to talk to each other, but that's also one of the ways that Apple gets secrecy. You cannot do a modem by being secretive and being in your pods and not talking to each other. So Intel's way of doing work does not apply to doing modems in this case. Here's the other thing. There's, I think, we're to 4 modem vendors. You have to invest in research. Do not confuse research with research and development. Research is 10 years out. You are defining the telecommunication standards in 10 years. If you're not investing in that and you're not in the standard, you will be late. So how is Apple, who doesn't take front and center on these standards boards because they're secret, but modems can't be secret. They have to communicate with everything. And it's not just 6G. It's 6G, 5G, 4G, 3G, 2G. These systems have to interoperate. You have to be able to make a phone call on a 2G network, not just stay in this network. So there's historical baggage, which I think they got from Intel, but there's also the testing that you have to do and the trade-offs in the RF. And that RF subsystem needs to talk like 5 languages at the same time. So what's my final point? How long is the board of directors going to let this lunacy go on? Right? I think there were quotes around, I'm paraphrasing, Apple hates Qualcomm, right? But when does common sense and pragmatism come in and say, this just isn't worth it. I need to put these thousands, maybe tens of thousands of resources on maybe making a better processor or a GPU or an NPU. Intel and Qualcomm and AMD are after Apple on all of this other intellectual property and processors. But board of directors, investors, this isn't a spectacular fail to replace Qualcomm. Not my words. Wall Street Journal, Aaron Tilley. I'm going to leave it at that.
And we might, based upon historical commentary, agree.